Hi, everybody. Sorry for the small wait of setting up and all that. Welcome to Game Creator 2014, our second workshop. We're talking about game design today, and the aim of these workshops is to kind of follow the development process of making a game. So Game Creator is about making the best game. It's a competition. It's held by the Icelandic game industry in cooperation with Reykjavík University, who has given us access to these awesome rooms. We have a great lineup of sponsors that are providing us with the first prize. And this is our third competition that we're holding. So today we're talking about game design, like I mentioned. And this early on in a game development process, game design is kind of important if you want to make like a proper game, if you want to have a certain plan on what to do. And to talk about that, we have David Thue, who is a professor at Reykjavík University, who's going to take you through game design and the process of that, and even more, I think. Anyway, let's give him an applaud.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Am I coming through the speakers? Great. All right, so like I always said, my name's David. I'm a professor here at RU. I'm also a lifelong gamer, game AI researcher, and I've been working on various kinds of games, design and development, for about 10 years now. And so here are a couple of screenshots of the things that I've worked on, some Flash games, some games in different modding engines, like this is the tool for Neverwinter Nights, this is the tool for Dragon Age Origins up here. And I typically have used these games to further my research. I have a question, I make a game to try to test that question and find out something more about game AI or games in general. And so today's talk is about video game design, and I'm going to kind of break it up into these three parts. So we'll talk about key principles and a work strategy. So a work strategy, I mean kind of tips or steps for you guys to potentially follow while you're coming up with your own game designs. And they're going to be kind of mixed together, the principles with the strategy. And then at the end, I'll give some advice from professionals who actually have worked on commercial video games that have done quite well. And so throughout this talk, I've tried to really gear it toward people who are going to be making a game over the course of 4 weeks, which isn't that much time, right? So I'm really trying to distill it down into the kind of most important basic things that you need to think about. There are certainly more advanced things to talk about that I'm not going to cover here as well, but I wanted to kind of reach as broad of an audience as I could. And so we can ask this question: what makes a game good? Any guesses out there? Anyone want to throw something out? Entertainment value, okay. It's kind of, it feels like it might be a little tricky thing to define though, right? It's like good, it's kind of the same nebulousness or vagueness. And so what if we ask maybe an easier question? What makes games bad? You might say, oh, well, what if the player says, I can't figure out what to do next? Or, that doesn't make any sense, why did that just happen? Or something like, I'm completely stuck, I can't get any further in this game. These things are clearly bad, right? So these are just a few things that Ernest Adams came up with. He publishes this list of things every year saying, bad game designer, no Twinkie, you don't get this dessert because you're a bad game designer. These are faults in current games that he's noticed. So let's think about these questions in particular. So when someone says, I can't figure out what to do next, that tells us that these games need to be learnable in some way. We need to be able to figure out, or players need to be able to figure out what they should be doing next. When they say that doesn't make any sense, that tells us that our games need to be plausible. They need to be believable in the context in which they're set. And then if someone says, I'm completely stuck, well, that means they need to be completable, right? Like, this is a basic thing you have to be able to get from the start to the finish. So I'm going to talk about each of these things in a little bit more detail. All right, learnable games. These learnable games always ensure that the player can figure out what they can or should do next, how they can do it, and then which of their options might be better than others. This is kind of a fundamental thing toward learning how to become better at playing a game. And so, for example, we can think about Super Mario Brothers, the very first Mario game. We've got the box art there. And so, okay, what can players do? Well, I mean, they're supposed to go to the right, basically. That's kind of the core of the game. How can they do that? Well, they can move, they can run and jump and walk, and they can shoot fireballs occasionally. And so which options are better than others? Well, the ones that avoids enemies and stops you from falling into pits, right? That's kind of the basic idea of what's going on for Mario. And you learn this all in the very first level of the game. You know exactly everything you need to know to play Mario from the first, say, 2 minutes of gameplay. All right. Another thing about learnable games, and kind of some tricks you can use or tools you can use to make your games more learnable, one of them is called affordance. This is the idea that objects that are interactive kind of fundamentally call out to you as to how they should be interacted with. Classic example is a doorknob. It's about the size of your hand, right? And it's kind of round, so you're supposed to make this kind of gripping motion toward it. And then it's round, so it looks like you might be supposed to turn it, right? Just by looking at it, you kind of get a feel for what you're supposed to do. We can use this in games as well. Now, tropes. This is an idea that you see very often. It's often talked about in terms of movies or TV shows, but it happens in games as well. And you can leverage these things. For example, standard control schemes. If you're going to have a first-person game, you should probably use W, A, S, and D on the keyboard to control the movement of your character. If you do something else, people are going to be kind of thrown off because this has become kind of a standard in the games industry. Other things that are used to kind of teach people and to direct people to where they should be going or what they should be doing are things like spotlights or glowing objects or sound effects in your games. Prince of Persia: Sands of Time was kind of a textbook example of using this. Their save points are these kind of shiny, glowy things that appear in the game now and then. And you're not told that they're a save point until you happen to stumble upon one the first time. You're just kind of exploring, it's like, ooh, what's this shiny thing? You walk into it, and this cinematic happens, and you're offered a chance to save the game. All right, plausible games. These are games that ensure that the player always understands why they should or shouldn't do something, and then what might happen as a result. So in that case, you can think of spikes. If you see spikes, you probably shouldn't move your character into them, right? You're probably something bad's gonna happen as a result. So that's kind of another example of affordance, but it works into plausibility too. And so plausible games are also consistent within their own setting. Suppose you're playing Call of Duty and suddenly you see somebody summon a unicorn in front of you. Right? This is probably, you're going to say, what the heck was that, right? It's not plausible in the context of that game. So it's something to kind of pay attention to. Examples here as well. Power-ups, they look kind of shiny. It's like, ooh, that's something that I want to get, right? Enemies look dangerous, so I should probably avoid them. Pits look bottomless or full of spikes, so that's, again, something to avoid. All right, completable games. They ensure that no matter what the player does, they can always get to some intentional ending of the game, and this intention is important, right? Because, I mean, the player could just leave, right? And that would be bad. So game over is a valid intentional ending. Okay, you have to reload from a previous save point. But sometimes you don't even get that, right? Back in the day when the very first Halo game came out, I was playing it on PC. Having a great time, shooting aliens, great. But then my computer-controlled allies decided to jump in a Warthog here, drive it around, and put it in a great place for me in case I might need to use it, right in front of a crevasse that I had to get through to pass the game. There was no way to get them out of the Warthog to move it myself. I couldn't blow them up. And so I was just stuck. I couldn't get any further in the game. I had to leave, right? There was no game over screen. It was just broken. And so watch out for this kind of thing, right? It was enough to stop me from playing the game, just right there. And that's something definitely to avoid. All right. So now we can get back to this question. What makes a game good? Once you've got these kind of three basics down, you've got something that's learnable and plausible and completable, then you can think about adding features, right? So maybe you've got an intriguing story, or maybe you've got really gorgeous graphics, or hard decisions for the player to make, or maybe some unique game mechanic, or maybe you've got some emotional impact in there somewhere. So which of these works for you depends on what you're trying to do, right? If you're making a game like Dear Esther, has anybody played this game? Hands up, dear Esther? Yeah, okay, a couple. I highly recommend it. It's very interesting from the gaming point of view because there isn't really much to do as a gamer. You're basically exploring an island. It's very beautiful. There's a very interesting story. It's kind of like an interactive poem in a way. But from a gameplay perspective, there's not much going on. Then you look at Sid Meier's Civilization 5. This is a game where there's tons of things to do all the time. It really keeps you like, oh, just one more turn, right? That's their kind of classic catchphrase. But there's not really that much of a kind of top-down story in there. There's no author that's come and sat and said, okay, now we're going to be telling this story in this context, except for a couple missions that you get. But the core gameplay is this creating your own story in a way. So, okay, this is the first kind of point of the work strategy I'm offering up for you guys as a suggestion. You need to set a specific goal for your game. What are you trying to do? So some examples might be, okay, well, players will feel joy from cooperation. It could be that simple. Or both players will hate each other by the end. You might want to try that. Players will understand long division. Okay? Or maybe players will become more likely to recycle. Right? These are all things that you could try to accomplish with the game. Like, they're not necessarily about having fun all the time. Maybe that's part of it, but you could also have these higher level goals too. And so they all kind of have this structure. Players will something. And so now to pull these off, you're going to need to think about what kind of features will work toward those goals. And I like to break features into two categories. They're either effective at achieving your goals, does this thing achieve your goal, or they're compelling. And that means that it attracts players to your game and it keeps them there. It keeps them playing long enough to actually experience the effects that you're trying to instill. And so you can think of kind of trying to build a game as sort of this meta game, if you will. We've got our game up here, and we're trying to lift it up as high as possible. It's the higher it is, the better the game's going to be, okay? We've got our foundation down here. We know that it's going to be learnable, plausible, and completable. And so now we're going to try to figure out which features to stick in here and stack them up to become a better and better game. And so here's some potential features you might think about choosing. This is the second step of the strategy. We've got to think about what features we're going to use. So yeah, beautiful visuals, intriguing story, maybe you've got crafting, or kind of anything else you can think of. You've got to pick your features. But you have to choose wisely, because the extra height you're going to get on that graph, the value you're going to get from adding that feature is going to vary from one to the next. And also the amount of work that you have to do is going to vary, right? You're looking for things that have not much work, but a whole lot of value, right? Those are the best features to focus on. In the context of Game Creator, you might only be able to choose one feature to really focus on during the course of the next 3 weeks. And so you're really looking for one that has this winning combination of being kind of tall and narrow in a way. All right. This feature might be the one that you need to think about the most. It's the core gameplay loop. Right? What will players actually get to do while they're playing this game? So some examples might be, okay, they can move, they can aim, they can shoot, and they can recharge. This is what you can do in Half-Life, for example. Or from StarCraft, you can build, you can plan, and you can command. That's kind of the core mechanic of what's going on in StarCraft. Or Super Mario Brothers, like I said, you can move or you can shoot, basically. And so when you're thinking about this core gameplay loop, ideally, it's going to be somewhere in here, right? It's got to be both effective and compelling. If that's the only feature you're going to be really focusing on, you kind of have to figure out both aspects of it. Now you can think about saying, all right, well, what if I have a feature that's super duper effective but not at all compelling? Okay, that would be like standing something over here, and this thing isn't going to be very well supported, right? You know, I tip over. You're not going to get that many players to come and play your game. Similarly, you have something that's super compelling but not that effective. You're going to have a lot of people maybe sign up and try out your game, but then they don't keep playing and you lose them. Or you're not having the effect that you want to have on them. So you kind of need this mixture of both things. All right. And so let's talk a bit more about effective and compelling games. I'm going to start with compelling games. So this is kind of a nebulous thing as well, like trying to define fun in a way. But there are things that intrigue people, right? Mystery is one thing. Got the elusive man there from Mass Effect 2. Beauty, there's a scene from Skyrim. Like sometimes it's nice just to wander around a very lovely place. We've got novelty. This is Mirror's Edge, where you play a free runner, basically. You're climbing up buildings, jumping across gaps, grabbing onto poles, and so on. It was a very novel mechanic at the time. And then you've got rewards. Something like Borderlands 2 you find these randomly generated weapons all over the place, and they're always a little bit better than what you've got, and so you have to think about, okay, like, oh yeah, I want to do something new. Yeah?
Where would you categorize World of Warcraft or something?
Aha, World of Warcraft. What's the motivation for World of Warcraft, or I guess what's compelling about it? For me, it would be the social aspect of World of Warcraft, that you can actually have adventures with your friends in real time. So yeah, this is not an exhaustive list by any means. These are just a few ideas to get you guys thinking of, okay, what can I do to make my game more compelling? All right. Now I want to focus a bit harder on how to make a game effective. This is something that we heard a bit from Ingthod from Luminox Games last week, talking about experience curves. I think these are super useful. So an experience curve basically describes kind of an ideal player trajectory from start to finish in a game. And you can think about this having various different dimensions. You might be talking about, okay, the game's difficulty might have this certain shape over time, or maybe the player's skill has a certain shape, or maybe it's their happiness or their sadness or their frustration levels. All these things you might want to know about your player while they're playing, you can kind of draw as an experience curve. And so this curve then becomes kind of the gold standard for an effective play. If the player's experience actually ends up following this curve, then you're saying, okay, this will be something that's effective for them. My goal will be achieved. And so this is the third step of the work strategy, and then we need to create goal-related experience curves. So here's an example. All right, suppose my goal is that players will enjoy applying their skill to overcome tough challenges. Okay. And my feature is a shoot-'em-up combat. Say we're playing, I don't know, Raptor or something from back in the day, and we've got, that's our core game loop, shoot-'em-up combat. All right. Now, I'm going to show two experience curves that are both tied into enjoyment via this concept of flow, which we heard about last week. So we've got players, the difficulty over time for the player and their skill over time. So we want the difficulty to kind of increase fairly steeply at first and then kind of meter off after a while, and the player's skill to follow the same path. And this is the crucial thing. We want the player's skill to match the level of difficulty all the time. This is kind of, when you have this and you're performing at high enough of a level of difficulty, that's what this dashed line is showing, kind of from this point forward, the same kind of piece of the game, very high difficulty, very high skill level for the player. This is where they experience flow, and it's a sense of being totally immersed in their experience in a really pleasurable way, something they enjoy, right? And so we draw those two curves, and they're tied into our goal of enjoyment through flow in the middle there, right? We've got difficulty and player skill. When they match and we pass that threshold, suddenly flow goes up. And then here we've got the enjoyment slowly increasing over time, probably because they're learning a bit, and that can be fun too. And then at the top here, they're experiencing a whole lot of joy because they're in this state of flow. And so this is describing kind of our ideal experience for our player in this particular context. All right, step number 4 for the work strategy. We need to design the gameplay to fit these curves, right? We need to have some way to try to make sure that the players go along these ideal curves that we've created for them. And so to try to do this, well, we can draw each curve from start to finish for each dimension. Remember, we had dimensions of difficulty or skill. And then we need to divide that game into a series of sections, like levels or quests maybe, and then try to design within those sections to follow that little piece of the curve. So here's what that might look like. Say we're dealing with excitement now. All right, well, here's level 1, we need to have this shape. Level 2, it needs to have this shape. Level 3, it needs to have this shape. And so this is taking kind of an entire game and then looking at the little pieces. You can do the same thing on the inside, right? You can say, okay, what about the first part of the level? We need something that's fairly exciting to get the player going on here. And then in this part, we need, okay, maybe there's a bit of a letdown or some kind of setback that happens to the player. Right, so this kind of divide and conquer approach, I think, can work really well to try to match these curves bit by bit over the course of the game. All right, next, we need to kind of prototype and iterate. Right, you need to give people a chance to try these things and get their feedback. And so you need to create, all right, again, this is a suggestion, you need to create a minimal version of the core gameplay loop with the smallest possible amount of work to get some version of the game running. Some designers like to use paper, others use software tools. And then you can gather feedback from people playing this game concerning your goal, right? You need to tell them, all right, I want to know how much fun you're having here, or I want to know, say, how much more you're likely to recycle when you're done playing. It might be a little harder to judge. And so then, once you have their feedback, you use it to build a new prototype, and then you iterate. Gather more feedback, use that feedback to update your prototype over and over again. And I'm hoping that you guys will be able to manage this at least once during the course of this competition. All right, so there's a tool out there, free tool, called Machinations. Has anybody heard of this? Ah, nobody's heard of it. Okay. It is a tool to help game designers, basically. I'm going to give you a little bit of a look at how it works, if it'll work for me. Yeah, there we go. So this is a tool that lets you look at kind of pieces of game design. So here we've got a very simple game that's been modeled. It's 5 versus 5 basketball, okay? Oversimplified to the extreme, but it still kind of shows the idea of what you can do with this software. So we've got 2 players, or 2 teams, 5 here, 5 guys here, 5 guys there, and each team has a certain amount of skill. So the teams generate opportunities to take shots in basketball, right? Every once in a while, you're going to get into a situation where it makes sense to shoot the ball. And based on their skill, they're going to get some points. So the guys who have higher skill, they're more likely to get points, okay? And so now we can hit run on this simulator here, and it'll show us over time kind of how these 2 teams are going to do with respect to one another. And here it's pretty simple to predict what's going to happen, right? The team with the higher skills is going to get more points over time. But think about, say, a role-playing game system where you've got hit points and mana and stamina points, and you need to know, all right, what's going to happen if I change the cost of this particular spell to be 25 mana instead of 30 mana? How is that going to change the balance of my game, right? That's the kind of thing that you can use a tool like this to try to prototype. Like, it can get very, very detailed. And as an example of the detail, I'm just going to pop back out here and show you some examples of games that they have. This is all, you can find the URLs here. So here's StarCraft. I'm going to see if I can run it. All right, we're slowly getting minerals over time. I can use that to buy an SUV. All right. Maybe if I get enough over time, I can maybe build a barracks, but I don't have enough money right now. So these are clickable buttons right here that you can build in. And this website has a tool for you to create these diagrams, and it has tutorials explaining how to do so. So it might be worth a little bit of time. I don't know if there's necessarily enough time within Game Creator to learn a tool like this and really get the full use out of it, but definitely if you're planning to go further after, it's highly recommended to check this thing out. You can see we're being attacked right here. All right. Okay, so a bit of an overview. Good games are learnable, plausible, and completable, and they're based on features that have these 2 properties, or at least one of the 2. They're effective at achieving the designer's goal, and they're compelling enough to attract players and keep them playing your game. And so here's the work strategy kind of all in one go. We set a specific goal, players will do something. We choose features that support that goal. We create goal-related experience curves. Then we design the gameplay to fit those curves and prototype and iterate. I think that if you guys follow these steps, you'll be well on your way to creating a game that kind of stands up pretty well. All right. Words of wisdom now. These are from basically contacts of mine within the games industry who I went to and said, okay, if you had a chance to offer a piece of advice to people who are just starting out building video games, what would you say to them? Okay? Here are some of the games that they've worked on. You may have played some of them yourself. And so one of them said, all right, an indie game, basically a game like you guys are making, has to be something that's very small and very focused because you only have time to polish that one thing. Right? Stay focused on what really matters to you. Scope down, simplify, ship. Similar message there. Ship early, ship often. Get your stuff in front of people as soon as possible and iterate. This is how to know if you're doing something good or not. Whether you're building it, marketing it, etc., make sure that you're always focused on whatever is currently of the absolute most importance. And finally, finish it. All right. That's all I've got to tell you guys today. I'm welcome to any questions that you like, or you feel free to email me at this address. Got links to machinations here. This is a fairly nice overview book about game design by Wendy Spain. It's called Principles of Game Design. And you can look up through Google Bad Game Designer No Twinkie. And these are kind of a few of the sources that I've used to put this talk together today. Any questions? It is being recorded and posted somewhere. You can look up, what is it, the IGI Facebook group? Or sorry, YouTube?
So just because we are recording it, and I kind of want to, is this thing on? It will be in a moment.
There you go.
Yeah? Hi. So because we are recording this, I want to kind of repeat the question. So because you missed the one before the first workshop, is this being recorded? Yes, this is currently. And this will be on the gamecreator.igi.is. The first workshop is already up there, so you can go there and watch it there. It's on our YouTube channel as well, so you could look that up as well. But easiest way is to go to gamecreator.igi.is.
Anybody else?
Did everybody understand everything? Yeah, okay, lots of nods, that's good.
Okay, then I have one more game related.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on grind-based gaming, and how do you think it can be made more fun or more compelling, as you put it?
Aha, grind-based gaming. So like something you would have to do in World of Warcraft, say, or
Yeah, I think in World of Warcraft, or if we go even harder grind, many Android games which have no set ending. You like the Facebook game Farmville and shit like that, stuff like that. Which basically just compels you to keep going, but has no end goal. What is your idea? Like, what's your opinion about it?
So what's your opinion on grinding gameplay? Repeat the question.
Yeah. So I don't like it. In general, I would be very glad if it wasn't such a useful way for people to make money, right? Because that's why people do it, I think. Yes, people have these things about them that you show them a reward and a little bit while later they get another reward, but you're not sure quite how long later that reward will come. Randomized rewards. These things are addictive for us, right? And that's problematic in my opinion. It's kind of a way that game designers abuse their power to some extent, right? And as to how we could try to fix that or try to make it better, that's a very tricky question. Thinking on my feet here, let's see.
Maybe try to educate people about it, on the skill box. What is actually...
Yeah. I mean, you can teach people about the Skinner box. That is a good idea. The Skinner box is basically this experiment with rats, where they're given rewards randomly over some amount of time, and they found that some of them, the ones who get more and more addicted, actually stop eating. Like they just keep hitting this button to get food pellets, or they forget to sleep. They become so stressed and they die. Like they're so addicted. So yes, education would work to a point, but I feel like people wouldn't care necessarily. They're already hooked in a sense, and so it's like saying like yes, you're hooked. But you tell that to an addict, and they might agree with you, but I don't know if their behavior will change.
Can you do an excellent education game about the Skinner box by making a game that's a Skinner box?
Interesting. Yeah, it could be worth a try to make a game about the Skinner box as an educational tool. Yeah, I'd like to see that. Any other ideas, comments, questions? Okay.
Is there a lot of collaboration between people
So is there a lot of collaboration between people in cinema and people in games? I'd say it varies from one studio to another. Often, one example of collaboration would be like voice acting or motion capture acting even. Like there's one of the new games by a company called Quantic Dream, it's called Beyond Two Souls. They had Ellen Page, the actress, act out all of the scenes for the main character of the game. Like she is the main character effectively. You see kind of a rendered version of her throughout the whole gameplay. So her voice is acting, it's her emotions, and so she's been brought into this game world for you. So I think that's probably the closest collaboration in terms of actual production value. In terms of design, I don't think that there's too much collaboration that goes on. What do you think?
Well, there's one thing perhaps, which is, based on the same idea, but it's not necessarily a movie thing or a game thing. It's more like just telling a story. That's the hero's journey, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Which is like, I'm not going to say proper way. It's the easiest way to tell a story, basically. That's compelling, as keeps you attracted and all that. You should probably look it up. I'm not going to go into details on the hero's journey, but it's one of the most used way of telling a story. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, whatever. Most of them use the hero's journey to tell that tale.
Yeah, it's definitely a commonality between video games and cinema. Kind of video games have borrowed the storytelling techniques from cinema pretty heavily. I don't know if they necessarily collaborate in terms of writers or design teams.
No.
Anything else? So how are things going with your projects? Have you got like a groundwork of ideas? Have you decided like what your goal is going to be? Like, give me some sense of where you are. Anybody? Some are shaking their heads. Is anybody going to nod for me? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's one nod.
That's good.
2 nods, yeah.
Yeah, we have an idea and a framework maybe, but we don't know if it's going to be fun.
Okay, got an idea and a framework, but they're not sure if it's going to be fun. So do you want to maybe say a little bit about it and we can give you feedback? So that's part of what this is about too,
Yeah.
right?
Well, the idea is to combine like a game similar to Magic the Gathering, a card game, and combine that with a grind-based game like World of Warcraft, where you level up, gear up, and when you win battles, you get rewards.
Okay, so a
I didn't
collectible.
find, when you were showing those points we should be trying to fit into the game, I didn't find enough of them in my idea.
Aha, I
But
see.
idea sounds compelling to me. I would play it, I think, but I'm not sure if I'm the only one in the world to do it.
So it's a collectible card game that has kind of RPG elements in that you can level up and get rewards and things like that. And so there are, just thinking right now, there are a couple games that just came out that kind of feature this style of gameplay. One is Hearthstone by Blizzard, right? So,
Haven't gone into the beta.
it's open beta now, actually.
I think it's closed.
It just became open like 2 days ago. Yeah, definitely give that a look. So that's one thing to think about when you're making any kind of game, like especially these like, I'm going to mix these 2 genres. That's often really interesting to do. But you need to see, okay, have other people done this? And if so, how am I going to be different from that, right? There has to be some kind of new twist on your game that will make it more compelling for them to play your game than someone else's. That's.
There was one image when my teacher told me about like innovation and game design, innovation in game design, and he showed a picture of Darth Vader, only dressed in kind of a red neon lights and whatever, basically combining Tron with Star Wars. What do you get? So it's those kind of ideas sometimes when you take 2 ideas and like, hey, what if we put these together, and you come up with something. Well, sometimes amazing, sometimes a hit and miss. But it's worth going through that during a brainstorm session. Like if you haven't had an idea yet, a concept or something, if you're still going through the whole process of finding an idea that you kind of like, you can take a brainstorm session where you list up, and you and your team list up individually like things that you like in games, in movies, in your life, whatever. And you all take that together. And then you have a sort of a just design meeting of what if we put, this thing that, John likes and put it up with this thing that Peter likes. Let's combine them, and no, that's horrible. Okay, let's not do that. Okay, let's put these two together, and you get a lot of interesting ideas. At least you get a lot of interesting ideas. At most, you might get, a fantastic idea that will eventually turn into a full-blown game. So, I definitely recommend if you're still in this kind of a concept idea phase.
Yeah, there's actually one of the previous game creator workshops, I think game design from 2009 or so, talks about the idea creating process really nicely, about these brainstorming sessions. They can get a whole bunch of ideas, and then you take the best 10%, you expand on those, and then you take the best 10% of those to try to really focus on, okay, where is the core best thing about this for what you actually want to achieve. So I recommend looking those up, and you can find them on the Game Creator website.
Yeah, you can find them on the Game Creator website under our section, kind of getting started. I think it's named Getting Started, but the title of it is It's Dangerous to Go Alone. Take this. Reference, anyone? No? Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot to do it.
I have a question about an old game design that has kind of disappeared in the new age. It's the idea of a time-based game in an open world. A good game that did this was, I think, Fallout 1 or 2, I can't remember, where the whole universe is alive and changing as you play until it reaches an end. In the idea of effort versus value, the idea of replaying the game, how good of an idea is it today?
So basically the question is about creating, or I guess, is there still value in creating these large open world games that you're kind of meant to play through once, in a sense?
No, the idea is, of course, that you should play through it more than once.
Okay.
Because the world is moving without you. The idea would probably be to, if it was done today, it would probably be that you could start at different points with different kind of characters.
Okay.
Play through the world from different points of views. That's at least what I could imagine people trying
Right.
today. But I'm kind of asking about the idea of a living world that's still moving. Is it still a good idea, or has it just been thrown in the trash because it was a bad idea from the beginning, but people kept trying it?
Okay, so the idea you're talking about is a living world that moves through time, kind of regardless of what the player does, things are going to happen kind of on a schedule, right? And is that still a good idea? Because given that we don't see that happening much anymore in current games, if at all. Okay, to start answering, I loved Fallout 1 and 2. Fallout 2 is kind of what got me into doing game design and games research. So for me, that was one of the more compelling things about it, was that the world would not wait for me to get my stuff together. I actually had to go and actively take part because something bad was going to happen otherwise, right? For me, that's really interesting. As for whether or not it's a good idea in terms of design, I think the general consensus is that it's not that great anymore because players don't feel like people think that players don't like to miss anything, right? And I think there are a lot of players like that. They feel like, oh, just because I was less good at the game and I couldn't make it to this certain spot in time, like, why should I die because of that? And so it's kind of indicative of this trend of having really hard games in the past and moving more and more and more, kind of hand-holding the player to really guide them along. And it's like, oh yeah, you're having this fun experience, not too bad you died, you have to reload. And I think we need to strike a bit better balance between that. Right now we're pretty far into the hand-holding side of things.
I just want to say one thing with the open world that changes.
Yeah.
We're trying something new with every quest next, where it's everything happens, of course, like in an MMO, except all the mobs, everything that you can grind, they don't stay in the same spot. So if you went to a forest and found trolls and go there a few days later, you don't find them anymore because there were so many people grinding them, they moved to a different place. And if you raid somewhere, find a big boss, kill them, or easily in a forest. They move naturally with the players, so it's not the same because there are player interactions all the time. It's an open world, but the fact that it is that they have the world that they're trying to have, like a living world. So
Yeah, it's definitely an example of a living MMO world.
yeah, a living world. Even more acceptable than this particular.
Yeah, true.
Just one thing.
Yeah. Have to check that out. What's your opinion about the handling? You don't sound like you like it a lot, but it seems to be indicative that games get more handholding as more casual players maybe join the market.
Right. So the question is, what do I think about handholding? And given that it is useful for getting casual players into the market, and yes, that's true. There will always be I don't know about always, but for at least the next several years, there will be room for games that handhold because there are still casual gamers who want to play and who don't really know that much about games. And it is nicely accessible for those kinds of players. I think, though, there is still a lot of room for games that are hard in a sense. And we're seeing kind of the resurgence of that as well with the permadeath games, like Faster Than Light, for example, where you're playing through and you die and yeah, there goes 3 hours of your time, but you've learned something along the way that you can apply the next time.
In regard to this casual players, I think I read somewhere that Blizzard, there was a lot of people that were angry with the new Diablo game because the balance was really bad in late game, and also the hardcore modes wasn't good and stuff like that. But I think Blizzard said that 97% of the people who played the game only played through it once, just casually, and then they never played it again. And there were only like 3%, which 90% of the work about the game was, to make them happy. So it really wasn't worth the effort to make it more balanced and better in endgame because nobody really played it.
Yeah, I guess. So yeah, commenting about Diablo 3 kind of getting flack for not being good enough in the end game, but really only maybe 33% of the players actually got to the end game, and so many others just played casually and loved it. I think 3% now feels like nothing, right? But that's probably still more players than there were talking about 80% 20 years ago, right? So it is a substantial amount of people, and I think that's kind of where we're seeing Kickstarter games succeed a lot. When you target a game that's going to be hard for those kinds of players, you can still get enough money to fund yourself and make a game that way. And I guess without maybe worrying about, if you really want to make this kind of game, you don't necessarily have to worry about making it hand-holding for the casual gamers. I mean, you might not make as much money as a result, but that's your choice as a designer, I guess. Any more comments, questions?
Where do you see games evolving?
Where do I see games evolving to? I think one thing that's exciting me right now, at least, is the idea of virtual reality becoming much more within reach. The Oculus Rift is a headset, and what's the name of it now? It's a treadmill, not really a treadmill, but a platform that you can walk on, basically. There was a Kickstarter for it that got funded last July or August or so. Anybody remember the name of that thing? Omni, yeah, that's it. Yeah, the Virtuix Omni. These two devices combined feel like we're really getting a lot closer to having true presence in games, to actually feel like you're really there inside the virtual world. Because with the Omni, you can walk in any direction. It's you've got this thing around your waist so you're not going to fall over. And then you can look in any direction with your headset, and you might have some kind of gun or maybe PlayStation Move controller or Kinect that lets you actually interact with your arms as well. And you're getting a lot closer to sort of being in these virtual worlds. I think that's one of the things that's going to be coming up. Storytelling is something else. Strong stories.
Does it worry you to think about 300 million Americans walking on treadmills in a virtual world with guns?
Am I worried about all the Americans on virtual treadmills with guns?
It's better to
No.
have them in a virtual world.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I'm happy for anybody to be getting exercise while they're playing a game. That's fantastic. So yeah, I think it's a win overall.
Yeah, I saw.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. I saw one video of some guy playing, on the treadmill and with Oculus Rift and everything, playing Team Fortress 2, and it kind of shows you where you're super cool playing the game, like with just buttons and all that, but as soon as you actually get into position where you actually have to run everywhere, and you get really tired, halfway through the level, like shit, I'm not going to finish this level, it's a wonderful thing to actually witness that, kind of this detachment from the virtual world in terms of actual fitness.
So it's going to be even harder in Team Fortress 2 to get a sniper.
Yeah, because there's a guy even faster than you who's actually, fit. I personally would probably just, lay back and, support the team somewhere at the back or something. I don't know.
Are you saying that you're in the age of fit gamers?
Yeah,
an
could
age
be.
of fit gamers could happen. Right.
Like that with the Omni having a gun and stuff. There's this really musical Markiplier who tried the Omni with the Oculus Rift and a gun. They implemented it into Half-Life, remember?
Hmm.
And they made like a virtual gun that like when you what's this implement when you hit here, it's like you swing the gun.
Cool.
That sort of stuff.
Oh, nice. So some people have worked on tracking a physical gun to actually mirror the movements in game. That'd be really neat. And that's something that kind of is an open research topic in a sense as well. Like I mentioned, I'm a game researcher in a lot of ways for what I do here. So this is something that we're trying to promote here at RU, is to get more people, like students, like say recent graduates, to come and maybe do a master's in game research and try to really look at these new technologies and learn something about them that we could maybe then use to make games better in the future. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll comment on the Oculus Rift.
Sure.
There's actually a category of videos on YouTube where people are alone in the Rift playing scary games. And then all of a sudden they just play and talk a lot, and then all of a sudden they jump because something's happening in the game. And there's a whole new category. It's really funny.
Now, there's one of those scary games in the Rift that basically while you're playing, you are in the virtual world sitting on your couch. It's like you're playing a PlayStation game. Like you're looking at a virtual TV in this space, and it's like you're playing some kind of console game, right? But the point of the game is that as things start to become scary in this little console game, things around you start to become scary in this virtual living room that you're sitting in as well. And one thing, there was a video online on YouTube. It's been taken down, unfortunately, so I can't link it to you guys. But what the guy experienced was, okay, usually when he's playing a scary game in the Rift, he hears something behind him. He takes off the Rift and he looks behind him in his real living room to see if something might be out to get him, right? He's concerned for his real physical self in the world. Okay. But in this game, you're sitting there, you're playing on this virtual console. Something scary happens behind you. He just turned and looked over the back of the virtual couch. Like his connection to reality was somehow severed in a way. And that to me is really, really interesting. It feels like that's something we might not have seen before.
Not much about game design, but I'm just speaking from personal experience here. I get a weird look every time I have a headset with a microphone on, and the Oculus Rift looks like I'd probably just be punched if I ever wear it in any kind of social situation, meaning I'm at home on my computer, somebody's home too. Do you think there's any chance that the Rift will ever be accepted as headphones have become things to Skype? More normal people not using it.
I think the look of the Oculus Rift can really be improved in terms of just adding googly eyes on it.
But it will get smoother. It's bulky today.
Yeah,
But it will get smaller and smaller.
headphones were small, and I'm talking about back when I used my Xbox. You got that little headphone thing with you. If you were just playing with the controller, you did not get a weird look. At least I did not. However, if I had the freaking headphone on, I'd get a stare every single time somebody walked past the living room.
Huh.
It had this kind of a stigma, but it kind of weaned off as Skype got more and more popular. People realized why you had it on. It didn't become a nerdy thing, it became a social thing. And I'm wondering if the Oculus will ever actually reach social, well, TV watching standard. It's, again, not game design related, I'm just wondering.
I think it could. I mean, yeah, so the social aspect of a Rift, to me, isn't that compelling unless it's just for laughs, like, right? Because I'm not seeing what this person is seeing in the virtual world unless it's looking at these two circles on a computer screen somewhere. And to me, that's not very engaging as a viewer. But socially, to have multiple Rifts in the same room, all in the same virtual world, that would be much more interesting for me. And then nobody cares what anybody looks like, right? Because you're all just looking in the virtual space. Anything else?
Surely there must be some questions on game design in a game development competition, right?
Maybe.
There you go.
Have you designed any games?
Yeah, so the ones we showed back here. Yeah. All right.
So were you just designing or what did you do?
So I did, let's see. For this one, it was like a 7-man team. It's actually a university project. I was the kind of lead developer, about 90% of the work I did for that. We all kind of collaborated on the design. This middle one was a really lightweight project. It was kind of a test of ActionScript 3 back when it had just been introduced. Can we do the same thing that we did in ActionScript 2 and redo it in AS3? It was basically like 4 days of work and can we get this done? I did all the coding for that and it was just super simple design. The one up there is a puzzle game called Dot Master. You can find these online, some of them at least online, by the way, if you want to give them a try. This is a research prototype that I made to try to learn about players, try to predict which buttons they're going to click to move these pieces around while they're playing. Yeah, all design and development was done by me. These two are in my more recent work, kind of bottom corner here, top corner up there. They are set in commercial game engines, one for Neverwinter Nights, one for Dragon Age. Each one is about a 45-minute long interactive story where there's an AI system trying to manage your experience for you. It tries to learn about you as a player and then dynamically decide what should happen next based on what it's learning. This has been a topic of my research for the past several years.
Similar to the Raptor in Left 4 Dead.
Yeah, so the AI director in Left 4 Dead is kind of the closest commercial, or most similar commercial application of this kind of idea. There, they were looking at trying to moderate emotional intensity for players over time. Here, we're trying to basically put them into situations that they find either entertaining or that make them feel like they're in control over what's going to happen next. Those are kind of our goals for these games. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
What do you think of submersive games?
Say again?
What do you think of submersive games? You know, games that really get you to think that you're really in the game as the character. What do you think of such games?
Yeah, I think they can be very powerful. So the question is about is submersive or immersive would be one word that I would use as well. Like games that really get you involved as a player and kind of you forget about the outside world, right? Like you feel like you're really there. I think that, and you get this more when you're wearing an Oculus Rift as well because all the distractions are gone. I think it's a really powerful experience and we stand to gain more leverage as game designers as we get the technology that allows us to do these things. So we can have more opportunity to frighten people really well or to like make them marvel over something beautiful, right? They're not just looking through this window in front of them, but it's kind of all around them. Yeah, I think those kinds of experiences are a game designer's dream in a way because more things are possible with them.
When it comes to complexity to try to improve immersiveness, have you ever seen or played the game, I think it was called Revolver. It was a very tiny indie game where you basically had one gun, and actually you didn't even have a gun at the beginning. It had a receiver, yes. It was a big map, you could find a weapon, just one type of gun, and three types of robot enemies. But the idea of having to clock the gun, to take out the magazine, put in a new magazine, reload the magazines, all of this was very complex. And there were many times when I just dropped the magazine instead of reloading. What is like the complexity into immersiveness? Where should it begin and where should it end?
Yeah, so complexity versus immersion. I think, so it sounds like from an immersive point of view, the thing you're talking about, or the thing that works really well in that game, would be the realism of it, right? Like, these are things that you actually have to do with a real weapon, like pull the magazine out and so on.
If there was a bullet in the chamber when you switched out the magazine, you didn't have to plot it to put a bullet in the chamber.
Right.
But if you finished completely the ammo before, you had to plot it. It was very much micromanaged for the bullets. There were not enough bullets for the enemies in the level. You were meant to die and lose. But it was just fun to try to get further and further and try to live longer and longer.
Right.
And if you wanted to know how many bullets you had to manually check the magazine. And
True, but there was no interface in the game.
Yeah, so this sounds like, sorry, what's called receiver? Yeah, so this game sounds like it's a great example of finding a core mechanic that works really nicely, and just it's both compelling because of this realism aspect, and it's kind of effective at being fun to play. Like, for one, you're learning about like how a gun works, which people might want to learn about, and also you're having this fun first-person shooter experience. Right? I think that, to me, that feels like something that a team here might be able to pull off. Like, something to that scale feels like what you might be shooting for with this contest.
it was made as part of one of these contests in America.
Oh, okay.
Someday FPS was the name of the game down.
Someday FPS.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Is there like anywhere where you can get like the engines like Unreal technology engine or something? Unreal Tournament?
Right. So actually, next week we're going to have a talk on Saturday here about game engines specifically. You can get some links to game engines on the Game Creator website. I know that Unreal, I believe, is free up until the point that you start making money, I think.
UDK engine is, I'm not sure, so I might be lying to you, but at some point I thought it was up to, that you can make money on it up to the point where you reach like $50,000 or something like that. I'm not quite sure with number, and I think it changed at some point.
Yeah, you'd be surprised at how many of the big name game engines offer some kind of free version to you, kind of for small developers, because they really want people to be using their tools. So just by all means, go to the websites and just look, and you might find something that you like.
Yeah.
What's the status of AI like now in the next few years? What are the problems and what are you trying to?
So AI in general or AI for games? AI for games or AI in general?
For games.
Okay, so yeah, the question is, what's the status of AI right now and where are we going? I think right now, one of the hot topics and kind of really interesting challenges for people is making StarCraft bots. Can you make computer players that can handle StarCraft? StarCraft is an incredibly complex game, far, far, far more complex than chess. And we can't really, like, we can play pretty good chess now and beat most humans, but it's not a solved game by any means. And so scale that up by like something like a couple million times, or like millions, a million times might be even the number. You can find out online what the true scaling is, but that's a really hard problem. Other people are working on trying to make more intelligent bots for helping the player in a game. Like, so you're playing a first-person shooter and you need some allies. Like the characters in Halo, the first game that I had such trouble with. Can we make them better so that they don't block me from finishing the game, right? That's one thing that people are working on. Procedural content generation has also become quite an active area of research in the past, say, 10 years or so, where they're trying to, like in Borderlands 2, automatically create the content of the game. So in there, you're automatically getting guns. Like, it's figuring out how the gun's supposed to look, figuring out its stats, how much damage it does, that kind of thing. You can also do procedural content generation for levels. There's one game called Infinite Mario that just keeps generating more and more of a Mario level for you. And so you've got the content generation there, and then people try to make automatic Mario bots that can successfully survive these games. And so more and more AI researchers are realizing that video games are a really good platform for doing research with on general AI problems. And so it's becoming kind of more of a good topic for that. There's a conference called AIIDE, Artificial Intelligence for Interactive Digital Entertainment. Just look up AIIDE. That's kind of one of the main conferences for game AI that happens every year. You can find some interesting papers and things from that.
One of the more interesting part of AI, we had a talk in Reykjavík University about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And one of the talks was about AI and more in regards of socially awkward AI. And one example that, you don't really think about it. At least I don't. I haven't really thought about it because, I've been playing games for so long. I've, kind of adapted to, this kind of a stupid AI in a way. But it's interesting to think about how, in most games, AI isn't social. Like when you talk to it, it's usually just scripted that it wants to talk to you. For example, was Stalker, where a group of people were just one playing a guitar and just having a cozy time in front of a fire. Usually, when a new person walks into this kind of a circle, they kind of like make way to for you to join the circle. But in these games, you basically just stand over them, like I can't join these guys. Or when for example, when you're talking to a guy, it's just basically static, and there are no social rules. So, like we're accustomed. For example, if I was going to talk to David about something, I would actually, I don't usually talk to him like standing right up to him. This is socially awkward, and just awkward. So research in that field is actually interesting to actually, what do we humans do when, a player comes up? What does, to make AI do the same thing as we humans do when the player comes up to a group? If I, step up next to David, he would probably take a step back, for that comfort zone around him or something. But, AI doesn't do that. It just stands there. So that's really interesting field of research, in my opinion.
Do you think a game like Minecraft has a learning curve, or is the curve just emergent from the world being open and you can do whatever you want?
So does Minecraft have a learning curve? I think it definitely does. And if you don't use any kind of walkthrough, it's pretty darn steep, I'd say. Right? Like when I first started playing, okay, here I am. I've got my hands, I can move around, and then what? Like I can start punching trees. And I mean, that's what you generally have to do to start playing the game anyway, right? But then to know that, okay, I need to somehow make a workbench, like out of what? And like once I have that, then I'll be able to make swords, and I have to arrange these things in a certain way to do it. I think that's part of the fun of the game for a lot of the new players anyway, was just understanding these things, and it's kind of like a puzzle to solve that the designer has given you. It's like, yeah, okay, you're in the world, survive, right? And just figure it out. And I think that...
It doesn't have like a flow you were talking about, but nothing that the game designer thought about, at least. It's just the world that you're put in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think that flow is a necessary condition for games by any means. It's a way to get to enjoyment, I think, but you can have a lot of interesting games that don't necessarily put you into a state of flow.
I saw a picture of Thue earlier, and the talk of AI reminded me of this.
Mhm.
I heard a talk to one of the designers of Thue. Thue has often been praised for having one of the funnest enemy AI that has been seen, and I personally concur.
Yep.
It's ridiculously good, but I read an interview where the designer said the AI has been involved at all since around 2000. They just made our levels around the AI to make sure that the AI could do everything that a human would do, and it at least offered the option.
So I don't know when the technology that Thue uses was developed. Well, so the fundamental technology that it uses is an A-star search. But the way that it uses it was interesting in that it's not using it for pathfinding or only for pathfinding. It's using it in a space of planning operators. Like it might be to attack or to find a new position. So these different things you can think about as being connected into a graph of possible things that the AI can do. So each one of these things is like a spot you can be in this graph. And then you're going to find a path through this graph to get to, oh, I've successfully attacked the player as a target. And so you can apply kind of an A-star search to that. That's basically the technology that was used to drive Thue AI. And there's a paper actually from that conference I mentioned, AIIDE, that you can learn about the AI in there from. But in general, for first-person shooter AI, yeah, there has been, I can think of one paper, again from the same conference, that looked at trying to, like I said, create better companions for AI, like Alex Vance in Half-Life 2, but not completely scripted, so that they would be doing useful things for you. Actually, the Elizabeth character in Bioshock Infinite has some interesting AI behind her, in that she's actively kind of looking around the environment to find things that would be useful to you. She's always trying to kind of guess where you're about to go so she can be ahead of you and actually be on screen while you're playing instead of behind you somewhere. Right? Because the game is sort of about the relationship between the player and this character. So that's, I guess, one of the more interesting recent examples of AI in games. Anybody else? I'm enjoying the questions so far.
Yeah, good questions. Would like to have more of them.
Here's one.
What do you think of games that just try to fish as much money out of you as possible?
What do I think about games that just try to basically fetch as much money out of the player as possible? They exist. I think it's probably ethically kind of broken, but yeah, I don't know if there's even a but about it. Like, yes, it happens. I don't condone it necessarily, but it's something that seems to work, right? Can we turn that into something more constructive, maybe? That would be cool. Like, whatever this is that's allowing someone to extract money from people, can we extract, like, something good from them instead? Can we make them recycle more? Can we make them use less resources or something, right? Like, the fact that there are these things that can compel people to do things, I think, is really interesting. Now, it's a question of can or should we use those things to do kind of good things for everybody, good things for one person, bad things for other people, right? Like, there are very interesting ethical questions there, and I mean, it would take a long debate to even start to decide on what good answers are, I think.
When it comes to game design, do you think it's better staying in a small group making kind of indie games? Or do you think that it should be your kind of main goal to end up in a bigger company, more job security? Because as we have seen from the very recent years, that the bigger game companies seem to care very little about game design and very much about profits. And as a very bad example is EA with their recent debauchery and DLCs and craziness. And just wondering if you were to choose between a stable and good job and a bigger company, would you go for it? Or would you rather want to stay in a small company that tries to make fun games?
So for me personally, supposing that I were a game designer out in the industry, and would I want to stay in a small company and make kind of games that I like to make, or games that satisfy the goals that I want to satisfy, or work for a large company and kind of have less autonomy and maybe end up being party to these more exploitative games? For me, so long as I had enough to get by, I would choose the former option. I would stay making the things that I think actually have a chance to make a difference in some positive way. The big companies will continue to exist, but like, we're getting, I think things are becoming more positive in a way in that light, given that we have things like Steam. to publish games in a very lightweight way. It's much more feasible for indie games to actually get out there. Like now with Aru coming out, have they released yet?
No.
Aru? Okay, they'll be out fairly soon anyway.
Yeah.
Like being able to do that and release on Steam, I think is fantastic for them. And that's something that you just couldn't do 10 to 15 years ago. So publishers are getting kind of a run for their money in a way.
What do you think of subscription-based games? For example, the Elder Scrolls Online game is in beta right now, and when people heard it was going to be subscription-based, a lot of people decided not to buy it. What is your opinion on such matters?
Yeah, so subscription-based games are interesting. For me personally, I have never paid for a subscription-based game. I've played the game when it's in open beta. I've played the games that are free to play and you just have to buy the box once. But fundamentally, I don't like it because as a player, I feel obligated to play when I'm paying $15 to $20 a month for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like that feeling as a gamer. I want it to be something that I can choose to do without any restrictions. Other people are different though. Like they find that this is an interesting world and they're willing to pay this price. Like they find it's a fairly small amount of money, and it's kind of like you're subscribing to a newspaper, right? You pay them some amount of money and you get some kind of easy access to entertainment, or you're subscribing to television service. So yes, it's becoming more frowned upon recently because of the free-to-play games with their microtransactions. But I think it's still, I don't really think it will hurt Elder Scrolls so much. It will probably hurt them to some extent, but the fact that Skyrim was such a smash hit buys them a lot of flexibility in terms of choosing what they want to do. That's my expectation anyway. I'm not a fortune teller by any means, so I may well be wrong.
Do you think a game like World of Warcraft, if it was not subscription-based, would have become so big and they could have extended the content of the game so rapidly, and because it's a lot of resources they have to spend on making the new content? So do you think that would have been possible for them if it was not subscription-based?
Do I think that World of Warcraft could have succeeded as well as it has without a subscription model for getting revenue? Back then when they started, I'd say probably not. Maybe now if they did something with microtransactions, they might stand a good chance. But the fact that they were fairly revolutionary in terms of like hitting the nail on the head for gameplay, that I think is kind of the main source of their success.
In play training, tutorial success, how do you decide how much to explicitly tell the player about the system, like in an RPG? How much do you have to tell the player about the system in the RPG itself?
Okay, so say you have an RPG and you have some kind of fairly complex system probably running how things work in the back end. How much of that do you need to actually explicitly inform the player about? That's what you're asking? Okay. Play testing. That's like basically the way I would approach that would be to make some kind of educated guess, like to feel like, okay, like I imagine you've played a lot of RPGs, you kind of know what the standards probably are. You can probably rely on the players understanding that same set of standards, like there's a mana system, there's maybe hit points, and you have to spend these things to do different things. Okay. Where you need to put the most effort in terms of explaining things is where you're innovating, away from what's traditionally done, right? Maybe you have some kind of new mechanic where you can dynamically choose to spend hit points instead of mana points on whatever you want, or I don't know, it's just made that up. But if you're doing something different than what is kind of the baseline standard for that kind of game, that's when you really need to make it explicitly clear what's going on. Yeah, and test lots.
Is there an opportunity between research in neurology and game design?
Sorry, what was the first topic?
Neurology.
Neurology. Neurology and game design. So are you thinking of like examining a player's brain while they're playing or something? Yeah, so I've seen some work done looking at EEG headsets, basically that are trying to measure the electrical activity in your brain. while you're playing a game to try to get at what emotions you might be feeling or what you might be, like whether they've triggered learning in your brain, that kind of thing. And there is that kind of research being done. I can't think of any direct citations right now, but if you email me, I can look for some and send you some articles if you like.
There are some games where you can use these headsets to control the gameplay with your mind.
Yeah. So not even just game design, but gameplay as well.
Yeah, and the speaker that will be here next week, Hannes, he's an expert in this. There's a company here in Iceland called Mind Games.
Yeah.
But I think it's not very active at the moment.
No.
But they were developing iPhone apps where you could control the characters in the game with a headset attached to your brain. So you're using brain waves.
I've tried this out.
Research area.
I went to Mind Games at some point and tried this out, and it's weird in a way. You know, they had some sort of a test application, not an application they did, but something that they used to test actual headsets and all that, and they made me like concentrate and be calm and all that. And the calmer I was, something happened on the screen. So, you know, perfect example of, you know, what you expect basically in these kind of games or these test cases, and like, you know, using your brain was to lift a thing, you know, lift something just using your mind. So, you know, there I sat in front of the computer with, you know, nothing, just, you know, just something on my head, and trying to be calm. And the calmer I was, then suddenly a car started floating up. That's amazing. That's
was
actually
it an X-Wing fighter?
No, it wasn't an X-Wing fighter. It would have been fun if it was, but of course, you know, in the same sense, like seeing that moving up as I was trying to be calm got me excited. So the thing fell down again. It's, you know, it's complete new gameplay in a way.
Yeah, I've had exactly the same experience in that kind of game. Get excited and it breaks.
Yeah.
I got a game creator question.
Hmm?
If we do a prototype now, and how much effort should we focus into making the code like reusable if we continue with the project, and or because it's much quicker sometimes just to make it a little messier and you know, create just stubs and fakes and everything just to get it to work, versus trying to create something reusable that we can continue with. Because if we're going to do very bad at the competition, it doesn't really help you a lot to have a reusable code, does it?
No.
Nobody's going to look at the code.
No, not really. But I think if I was doing the competition, if I was participating, I would do it quick and dirty.
Definitely.
I would look at it as if it's one of those game jams where you have 48 or 72 hours to make a game. You don't really think about making reusable code or having the code clean or comments or whatever. You just want to get that thing working, basically. And I would take the same approach on that. You want to have a working prototype in 3 weeks. So do it quick and dirty. I would suggest doing it quick and dirty. And if everything works out and you have this really great prototype, you could either go back into the whole thing and clean up the code, refactor it and whatever, or you could take that, you know, that prototype you made and use that as a reference to make a better version of that game. You could even change like the engine for it and whatever for it. So my suggestion would be quick and dirty.
Yeah. Sometimes throwaway prototypes are a good thing because it gives you the flexibility really easily to just do something else, and you've kind of committed to that from the beginning, so you're not upset at all.
Yeah.
I would like to know where it's a good place to see examples of, like, you know, how to make a fight interesting, the logic between what makes, you know, for instance, a fight interesting between two.
Right. Right, okay, so where, like web resources, for example, might you go to find out like tips and hints or suggestions or some kind of guide to get this kind of interesting gameplay, right? Let's see. So you might find something useful on aigamedev.com. They tend to post a lot of tutorials that are quite nice and meant to be accessible to a lot of people. Where else? I'm not sure where else offhand that I would look personally. What about you?
Well, one of the quick and speaking of quick and dirty, Google. Basically, just searching.
Right. But like last at the last lecture, one of the game developers talked about like that often there's a link between movies and games. You know how
Right.
the game is rising. And is there any like any like discussions about that where you can find similar things from other?
It's a good question. I'm not quite sure if I personally have anything. Most of that stuff I've learned in class, in a way. So
What
it's
was the question? Games and movies?
No, it's kind of just like what makes certain situations interesting and how to implement them. What's is there so the player like feels that if he's been doing a lot of work, if it were research or something, that he does have an edge over the person that doesn't do anything. To make the player feel like he is, he's improving.
There's been a lot of research on this, and there are something on the internet, research on player emotions and what are the chemicals the brain is releasing when you're playing. So if you search for top 10 player emotion, you see some of the most powerful emotion, and this is something that game designers can have in mind. So curiosity is one game emotion.
Yeah.
Amusement is another. Contentment is another. And they're different. And game designers can actually try to create gameplays that will generate these particular emotions. So there is research that has been done, and it's somewhere on the internet.
Yeah, there is a link on Game Creator. He reminded me of that. GameCreator.igi.is under It's Dangerous to Go Alone. There's a talk. There's a like a paper or something that Aurelius did. He's one of our members, Aurelius Aureliusson.
It's published on my website.
Yeah, but we also have a link on it on Gamma Sutra. He basically posted his paper on Gamma Sutra, and you can find it on our site where he mentions these top 10 emotions. There are other links on that page that, for example, mentions the 4 ways to fun.
Yeah, 4 keys to fun.
4 keys to fun. Yeah. And I would look at that and kind of you can find the authors of that, and from there on search your way through even more detailed discussions about it. There's also a talk. I think Will Wright, the creator of Sims and SimCity and all that. There's a talk on our Game Creator site as well, a YouTube link, where he speaks about that. Yeah.
The paper that you mentioned by Aurelius, it's actually a very good overview of different concepts. So it's a really great place to start.
Yeah.
It's called Designing Computer Games Preemptively for Emotion and Playtimes.
So look at that at gamecreator.igi.is. Okay. There was some, yeah.
When people go to design things, such as the looks of a character and the level and such things, what kind of programs would they use? Like, there are a lot of programs you can use, but which one specifically would one use to create such things?
So to actually create them or to sketch them initially?
Both.
So to repeat the question, what tools does a game designer, level designer or whatever, have to sketch up these ideas and create them? What's one of the most popular tools? I would start at the core base of a design or anything on a useful piece of program tool that's been around for ages, a piece of paper and pen. It's the most valuable thing in a way, or a whiteboard if you have one, to just sketch things up, wipe them out, sketch them better up, all that. In terms of like level design, I would do the same thing there, just sketching it up and like look at the flow of the thing and then like change it, because it's easier to just change it with a pencil and paper or a whiteboard, whatever. When it comes to creating levels and such, that's often specific to the program that you're using. Most of the time, the program that you are using offers some sort of a level designer or level creator or something like that. Unity has theirs, their world creation, whatever it is. Yeah, you have something to add?
Yeah, so this is something that we'll almost certainly hear about next week as well in the Game Engines talk, because that's meant to be, covering Unity and also some 2D tools, I think, that a designer and a creator might both be able to use. Does that answer the question? Anybody else? Yep.
When it comes to designing a game, do you think you need to have in mind the kind of people you're trying to attract to the game? In the case of a first-person shooter, wasting a lot of time trying to put the story into the environment would be completely wasted. While an RPG game, if you put some story into the environment, it's much more likely to be noticed. Of course, an exception is Half-Life 1, which told all of the story through the environment and little hints and clues here and there. Enemies with power all of a sudden implying that the aliens actually have some kind of cognitive intelligence. But most FPSs I see are completely void of any story in the level. Is that because you need to kind of, the question is, do you design the game around the people you think will be attracted?
So do you design the game around the people you think are your most likely audience? And yes, definitely. I think that's extremely important to think about, and the thing to realize is that, yes, players are different from one another. A big part of my research is trying to figure out, given that fact, how can we still make a game that's enjoyable to a broad range of people? Like, can we automatically customize what's going on based on figuring out which kind of player they are? Right now, though, that technology isn't mainstream yet, and so we're left with trying to focus on a particular group of players and appeal to them as much as we can. I think that is the best course.
So just thinking about this research, would like a part of it be if you're playing an RPG game and you have a player who always just presses next, and you would the AI would make the conversation shorter, maybe more focused instead of because when I played World of Warcraft, I read the first 2 missions, then I just pressed next, because I just wanted the items. That was fun in the game for me, but then there were other people who just enjoyed leveling and reading all the stories. So
yeah, so in any kind of game, ideally, I don't know, this is probably a hard problem to solve, right? But in the ideal case, the system would be watching all of the actions that you're taking and trying to figure out which ones are more or less interesting to you. like, or when you're more likely to do something, like click the next button sooner than another player, for example. Yeah, that would definitely be an input that I would want to feed into this system. As for automatically making the text shorter, that's a pretty hard problem, right? Natural language generation is generally really tricky, but there is a lot of research being done on that as well.
Yeah, I was thinking more about having it just scripted just two different types of text.
Yeah, sure. If you had like 3 versions, a tiny version, a medium-sized version, a really long version of the text, then sure, you could swap between them automatically. And I think a lot of players could appreciate that, or even just not show it for some players. Just like, click the next button to get your stuff.
Has there ever been a game art designer that hasn't really known a lot of code?
Yeah, I'd say definitely there are game art designers who don't understand programming. It's a fairly common thing.
Yeah.
Like you have people who are kind of trained classically in the arts, and then they come to work in a game company, say, and they will probably ultimately end up learning something about code because they need to know, like, oh, okay, I'm creating an animation for this character. How many frames of that animation do I need to make? It depends on the hardware we're going to be running on. It depends on the engine that we're using, right? So that education will likely happen, but I think people do often enter without much knowledge at all about programming.
Speaking of that, because I was once asked, what skills does a game designer have to have? Where do you learn how to be a game designer and all that? I think the broader knowledge that you have, and the more skills that you have, the better equipped you are as a game designer. But there isn't anything specific that you have to know to be, an okay game designer. There's nothing special, perhaps, like in like how to be a programmer. You would have to know a programming language and the logic behind all that. But game design doesn't have these prerequisite. Is that a word? Yeah. Except for one thing, I would say a game designer has to have one thing, and that's kind of the most crucial part in my opinion, and that's communication. Because you can have a crazy idea of some cool game, but as long as it's stuck in your head and you can't communicate it to other people, it's always going to be stuck in your head. So communication, that's basically the only thing, and that's a thing that can be trained. Just to actually, explain your idea to other people, because usually you're never just working alone on a game. You need someone else to work on a game. And if a game designer doesn't communicate his idea of a game, you will end up with a lot of different ideas for the same game. And eventually that game will have an identity crisis on what exactly it is. But otherwise, like knowledge about Norse mythology, that's probably a great thing to have for game design, because that's a lot of like back thoughts that you can put in character or whatever. Would you share something on what exactly is the skill sets for a game designer?
Having played lots of games, I think is the most important one, right? You need to have a feeling for what works and what doesn't, and that's a lot of personal experience. It's also kind of being aware of the general kind of community, like what they're thinking, right? Because you might be pretty different from a lot of the people who are out there playing. So having a sense, like reading reviews, trying to figure out, like build your own kind of Metacritic number inside your head, like whatever the magic they're using, I don't know, but like come up with a general sense of, okay, these people, this kind of community tends to really like this sort of thing, this kind of community really hates it, and okay, get a feeling for the landscape. I think that's important for figuring out whether or not an idea is going to be good or not. And then, having played a lot of games will give you a sense for, will this thing be fun, or is it more likely to make people feel influential or something like that?
Mhm.
When it comes to people that actually work for game industries, how would you put them in sections? Like, would them in one section of just people that make the code for the game, another section for people that just create designs for the game, or would you cut it in more sections of work?
Yeah, there are like lots of different sections in game development. For example, programmers. They kind of work on their own. So basically, the question is how many, how many sections would you have in a game development in terms of people skills, basically? Yeah.
Yeah, somewhat.
Yeah.
I think you're more like, would you cut it down into people that can make AI and others that can make general code, the people that could create the level and items and characters? How would you actually sort it out?
Yeah, so one way to get a feeling for that is to look at the credits roll for a game that you would see at the end.
Yeah.
So they often specify these sections very clearly. They'll say like, this was the AI team and this guy was the AI design lead. This was the technical team that made the tools that the level designers used. This was the script writing team. This was the cinematic team, right? They're often in a big company, you would have teams kind of at that scale of work.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends on the game that you're making.
Yeah.
It depends a lot. For example, CCP has an economist working for them.
Yeah.
They actually have a currency that's bigger than Icelandic krona. So they have an economist. And then they have, then some game companies, game studios, they have designers, clothing designers. They have people that compose music. These are the bigger games. But usually to the smaller studios, you really have to have artists, programmers, and then game designers. That's basically the roles.
I think also like Modern Warfare, when they were creating those games, at least some of them, they had like ex-military, just to get the behavior of the, like AI characters correct. How would a normal soldier react in this situation, and try to get that into the game. So it's pretty broad, I think.
Yeah, it is common for game studios to bring in outside advisors in a way. Like I know Assassin's Creed 2, the one that was set in Italy, had historians coming to kind of fact check all the things that they were talking about in the game to make sure that they were at least mostly correct.
But yeah, I would like to iterate that most small indie teams have these basically divide their team force basically down to artists, programmers, designers, and some members can be part of both groups. It doesn't hurt to have some sort of a project lead or some guy that actually can see and understand the overview of the whole game, because if you have all these teams working in their own corners, they may end up with different kind of perspective of the game. So it's always good to have at least have someone to actually look over the overall process of the game, and or that the team works that closely together that they know exactly what they are doing and what's happening each time. And that can happen through, in game design, in game development, there are often these morning meetings, or it's part of the Agile Scrum kind of a work method. And that's basically where the whole team meets up every morning to discuss what they did yesterday, what are they going to do today. So everyone on the team always knows, what everyone is working on. It's a good method to at least keep in mind. For such a small team as like 4 or 5 people, it doesn't really hurt to do it, but it doesn't really matter either, because you usually are that small that you kind of know what everyone is doing. But as the team grow larger, you will need to have some sort of a joint effort to know, who's doing what. So the overall game remains persistent to what it wants to be, what it should be.
When it comes to small game development companies that could be like 5 or 6 people perhaps, how would you suggest marketing for them? If they made like a game, but how would they put it out on the market?
There's actually our last workshop, our 4th workshop, which is what, 14th February? I can't remember the date. 8th February. We're going to have Ólafur Andri talk about marketing.
Are we?
Aren't you?
Okay, yeah. I thought I was talking about Nordic Game.
Well, I thought you were going to talk about marketing and Nordic Game.
But the short version is nobody knows. It does nothing you learned in marketing previously seems to work, or it works as intended. And the reason is the world has changed. There are some success stories where people can create a game, they put it out there, and if everybody buys it, everybody downloads it. It's a huge success. Then next guy comes, does the same thing, doesn't work. So it has a lot to do with the moment. So basically, for indie companies, the rule of thumb is to do as many things as you can, see what works and amplify what works, and that's how they do it. And if you have lots of money, you can advertise on Facebook. But that's a traditional way.
So it's kind of like trial and error.
Well, for indie companies, it's just build up a good network. Use all the means that you can, and just spread it out there, and try to get as much review as possible. Give your games to journalists, reviewers, bloggers, have them write positive things, collect all these things. So it's a lot of work. The big studios, they use their distribution channel, which has been, they have invested enormous amount of money into those channels. And they can leverage a lot of the investment to promote their games. But for the indie studios that don't have these budgets, you have to find new ways. And like I said, nobody knows what works. It has to be, so your strategy has to be to try whatever you can think of and see if it works. That's the short answer on marketing for games.
Yeah.
When it comes to game design, have you ever told yourself, no, I'm going to stop now when you were making a game because you realized you're almost basically just copying something you used to play? Or do you keep going because you know whatever you make in the end will at least be in some way different since you're not using the same engine? And you're just trying to tell your story.
Right, so as a game designer, if you realize partway through that you're effectively redoing something that's been done before, do you press on and do it because you'll have your own twist on it somehow, or abandon it in favor of something else? It depends on what your objectives are. As a learning process, I think it's really valuable to kind of try to remake the things that you love from your past in a way, because you gain a lot of understanding from doing so. To the point that that stops happening, though, and you've figured everything out, then maybe that's the time to stop, right before even finishing it. If you're trying to make something to sell, I think you really need to have a clear idea of what it is that's going to make it different before you continue pressing on, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble, most likely.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something to the group.
Sure.
That's all right.
Yeah, please.
Is everybody speaking Icelandic, or is there a
He doesn't speak Icelandic.
So, my name is Oscar. I came here today because I'm interested in this whole game thing. I'm a filmmaker, but I think it's great that these guys are putting on these lectures. I'm not really interested in sitting through all of them if I'm not going to work on something. So I just wanted to throw it out there that I'm a filmmaker. I'm producing a film. I've written screenplays, and I'm sort of background with marketing right now. So I just wanted to
Okay. Maybe we should end this now and move on to exactly that part. Is there any last question? I don't want to post a last question here. Yeah?
What will you do if you see everybody hacking your game?
Well, what will I do if I see everybody happy?
Hacking.
Hacking my game. Hacking my game. Well, it's a good question. You have to have, well, depends on hacking. Like,
I think he's referring to piracy.
piracy, right. There are a couple of ways to look at it. I think Thue, who was here last time at Luminox, made a fair assessment of that. Is that if everybody would pirate my game, I'd be sad because I'm not getting any money, and if I'm not getting any money, I can't make whatever game number 2. I can't continue creating games because I'm not getting any money, so I have to find some other job. As an indie game developer, it's kind of hard not getting any money for your work.